Coming up, for anybody who wonders about the disconnect between the elite classes, the governing classes, the ivory towers of the academy, and the working classes that propelled Donald Trump into office in 2016, and whether that disconnect still exists, just watch that video. Welcome back to Political Spirits. I'm your host, Franklin Rye. We still stand for the proposition that the left and the right should have a few drinks and talk. Compromise is not a requirement. If those discussions result in us changing or even abandoning our positions, that's fine. If they don't, that's fine too. We just need to talk to each other. In that way, we can unify through speech. And if the discussion becomes a bit heated at the end of the night, we should still be able to split up the bar tab and be on our way. So what are we going to talk about this week? How many times have I talked on this podcast about the extreme level of bias in the media? It's not just the over-the-top slant to the left in the stories that you do see, it's the failure to cover other stories. Most recently, the initial near-abject failure of most of the old-line mainstream media to cover the sexual harassment allegations against New York Governor Andrew Cuomo. But I'm going to bet that you know about those. You found out about them by watching Fox News or Newsmax or reading about them at Breitbart or on other sites that lean to the right. Recently, all outlets have started covering them, perhaps because some of the criticism of Cuomo is now coming from the left. But I'm going to talk about something very different from Governor Cuomo's conduct. And what I'm going to cover was talked about in an article at fee.org by John Miltimore back in November. FEE stands for Foundation for Economic Education. And the title of that article says it all. U.S. household incomes increased more in 2018 than in the previous 20 years combined. Now, I've talked about the fact that wages increased substantially in 2018, but until I read that article, I didn't quite realize the scale of the rebound from years of stagnation. I've talked about the fact that, to the surprise of many, much of the economic improvement in the early years of the Trump administration went to the very people he promised his presidency would help, the working class. But my commentary on that point didn't address the scale of the turnaround. In 2018, the wage growth exceeded the improvements in wages over all of the prior 20 years in the aggregate. That's right, the prior 20 years combined. So, what happened right before 2018 to produce that stunning turnaround? Well, you know what happened in 2017. President Trump pushed through widespread deregulation across the American economy and pushed through massive tax cuts. As the author points out, prior to 2017, U.S. corporate taxes were the highest in the developed world, even higher than China and Venezuela. The tax cuts pushed by the Trump administration and passed by Congress reduced corporate taxes from 35% to 21%. The sudden influx of additional capital to businesses was enormous, and the result was inevitable. Even though much of the media rejected the idea that the Trump administration's efforts would bear fruit in the form of increased wages. But they did. And as the author points out, the wages of those in the bottom quarter increased by a larger percentage than those in the top quarter. Think about that. For how many decades have we been told that the Republican Party is the party of the wealthy? That it's the Democrats who care about the members of the working class in the bottom half of the economy. But it was a Republican president who pushed through the changes that brought something we had been told for so long was impossible. Major changes, major increases in wages, with those increases being larger at the bottom than at the top. Well, how many times have you been told that actions speak louder than words? In this case, the old adage couldn't be more true. The actions of President Trump and the Republican Party in massively cutting corporate taxes and regulations spoke louder than any words amplified through the media on CNN or MSNBC or any one of 1,000 media outlets on the left side of the political spectrum could ever speak. And those actions put money in the pockets of millions of Americans. not through government checks, but rather through larger checks from their own employers. Trump and the Republicans did what government is supposed to do: create an environment where businesses can thrive, and as a result, their employees do as well. Will that fact bear fruit for the Republican Party going forward? Time will tell, and the midterms are never really far away, and frankly, notwithstanding all of the genuflecting from the press, the Biden administration really hasn't done much to give the Democrats confidence. We'll see what happens. Next topic. A video far more scary than any Hollywood horror movie. Every now and then I come across a video where the globalist left reveals their intentions so fully that the result is scarier than any gory slasher film Hollywood could ever come up with. I've lost track of the number of times I've had conversations with people who less obsessively than me follow developments in the political world, but who are just inexplicably trusting of the entrenched bureaucracies of our government and governments of the other most developed nations around the globe. And whenever I tell them how concerned I am about the path in which we're heading and how suspicious I am of the intentions of the globalist left, they typically claim I'm being overly cynical or conspiratorial or just too skeptical. Well, I just watched a video that made me realize just how incredibly wrong they are. The video was contained in a tweet from the World Economic Forum, and it was posted on redstate.com on February 26 in an article by Nick Arama. So what did the World Economic Forum say in its tweet? It said, quote, "Lockdowns are quietly improving cities around the world," close quote. That's right. The government actions which have choked off economies around the globe, forcing people out of jobs they've held for decades, destroying family-owned businesses that go back generations, spiking suicide rates in country after country, retarding the social development of kids prevented from attending K-12 classes in person, from participating in extracurricular activities like team sports and marching and concert bands. You can disagree about whether governments overreacted with their lockdowns, but I don't see how anyone can deny the tremendous harm done. Sure, you can argue the harm was necessary to control the spread of COVID, but I would argue a stronger case can be made that some state governments, such as the administration of Governor Ron DeSantis in Florida, ended up finding the sweet spot that limited lockdowns and protected the most at-risk populations, achieving better results than the national average, especially given the size of the state, and did so without destroying the economy and the people working in it, unlike the blue state governments of states like California. According to the World Economic Forum, those government actions which mandated the lockdowns were laudable. Think back to those videos you've seen in the last year, the small business people in tears talking about the collapses of their companies, the loss of the fruits of their lifetimes of labor. Think about the people unable to work to provide for their families. Now think about the fact that the name of the entity celebrating the lockdowns is the World Economic Forum. The use of the word economic in their name is so contradictory of their tweet in celebration of lockdowns that it strikes me as absurd. How can an organization with economic in its name applaud economic destruction? Perhaps you think I'm taking this too far. After all, I just read the tweet to you. I haven't even talked about what's in the video itself. So check this out. The video consists of some shots of empty roadways, computer screens, parked aircraft, and empty factory floors with a background of instrumental music of the type you'll typically hear in videos where you're presented with a string of interesting facts. The music is intended to promote the feeling that we're being enlightened. Well, this video is enlightening, but perhaps not in the way its producers intended. At the bottom of each screenshot, statements are presented for the viewer to contemplate. Here are a few for you to contemplate. Just make sure you think about what was actually happening in these lockdowns and what the World Economic Forum is attempting to accomplish with this video. The first image is of an empty road in an unnamed city, and the factoid we're presented with appears at the bottom of the screen. Quote, "Earth's seismic noise has been the lowest in decades due to lockdowns." Close quote. The next message says, quote, Scientists saw a wave of quiet around the world in 2020, close quote. That message, by the way, appears on the screen with a shot of a woman looking at a set of computer screens displaying information. The next message shows an empty Times Square. Quote, ambient noise in some cities fell 50%, close quote. Then, corresponding to a shot of commercial airliners parked unused on a tarmac, quote, as fewer people used transport, close quote. A vacant clothing factory floor is depicted, quote, and factories closed, close quote. And then a functioning seismograph is shown with the kicker, the reward, the benefit for the economic disruption that left scores of people unemployed, untold numbers of businesses destroyed, and spiked suicide rates as despondent people just couldn't take it. What was that kicker, that benefit? Quote, the quiet enabled scientists to record small earthquakes they would usually miss and improve their understanding of seismic activity so they can predict larger earthquakes in the future, close quote. Got that? Sure, lives were destroyed all around the world, but on a positive note, it was easier for seismologists to conduct their research. If there's a dictionary of phrases, I suggest that this video should be referenced when the phrase out of touch is used in a sentence, as in, quote, the World Economic Forum has produced a video which proves it is out of touch with ordinary people, close quote. But it goes on, and you know what's coming next. You know where this video had to go. Frankly, I'm shocked they didn't open with this. The next image, a suspension bridge with lane after lane devoid of traffic, and the written message, quote, there were also record falls in air pollution clearing skies from Asia to America, close quote. So the next time you hear a conservative asserting that the left is willing to destroy economies to fulfill their climate change agenda, think about this video. Think about depicting empty roadways, economic activity driven to a standstill, and celebrating it because it reduced pollution. Incredibly, the concluding message in this video was a simple question. Quote, how quiet was your local area? Close quote. With the words how quiet depicted in a soothing light blue to make them stand out from the rest of the text. Think about that. How out of touch with ordinary citizens do you have to be to imply to the slightest extent that the incredible societal disruption caused by the lockdowns for COVID could in any way be offset by the fact that they produced quiet? Well, I know, sir, that your business you spent your entire life building is now in bankruptcy. Your house is about to be foreclosed. You can't afford to send your kids to college, even though 2 years ago it looked like that wouldn't be a problem. You're afraid your wife is going to divorce you. Your kids are regressing socially because they can't go to school in person. Your son may have missed out on an athletic scholarship opportunity because they canceled his football season. And your daughter may have missed out on a music scholarship because they canceled the competitive band program. But hey, on a positive note, the streets are so quiet that it's almost like you're living on a country estate, like some of those billionaires going to the World Economic Forum meetings. Woohoo! For anybody who wonders about the disconnect between the elite classes, the governing classes, the ivory towers of the academy, and the working classes that propelled Donald Trump into office in 2016, and whether that disconnect still exists, just watch that video. And you know what? Someday in a more perfect world, perhaps the World Economic Forum will produce a video which isn't disconnected from the experiences of real people. Not likely, but that'll be when they replace their membership with what I consider to be perfect representatives for such an organization. Owners of small plumbing businesses. Because as I've said before, those people who also happen to own those businesses know how to balance their budgets, make their payrolls, and perhaps most important of all, they have a deep understanding of that most fundamental rule of politics and life. Runs downhill. Update. Real-time news here. Before I could release this podcast, the World Economic Forum must have received one hell of a lot of blowback. A few hours ago, they announced that they're deleting the tweet and that, quote, lockdowns aren't quietly improving cities around the world, but they are an important part of the public health response to COVID-19, Close quote. Okay. Now explain to me how on earth an organization could be either so incredibly warped in its priorities or tone deaf that the original tweet could have been released. My bet is that the fact that it was released says more about the priorities of that organization than the fact that they took it down after the blowback started. Next topic. Florida ascending. As you probably know, the Conservative Political Action Conference, CPAC, is in Orlando. It's normally held in Maryland, but was moved to Florida this year because of COVID restrictions. Our former president is scheduled to speak, and I would have loved to be able to hold off on recording this episode until after that speech so I could comment on it. But I had an incredibly important personal commitment that took precedent: my oldest daughter's wedding. So I'll be focusing on my daughter and her fiancé as they take their vows and move forward with their lives, listening to a political speech and potentially picking up some clue about what my favorite brash-talking, rule-breaking businessman/politician has planned for the next step in his life will have to wait. Normally, not being able to hear such a speech in real time would frustrate me, but I hope you understand and agree with me that fatherly love and commitment trumps all such frustrations. Incidentally, this might not be my last opportunity, even in the near future, to watch such a speech from Donald Trump at CPAC in Florida. There's a rumor that CPAC leadership is considering moving the conference to Florida permanently. And frankly, that would make a lot of sense. Look at what the state has become. As Governor DeSantis pointed out in his speech opening the conference, we've moved from being considered an election supervision joke in 2000 because of the endless battles over hanging chads. Oops, let me correct that. The plural of Chad is Chad, so hanging Chad. To the present, where we represent an example of doing it right, of promptly counting the ballots, of not rushing through last-minute changes to try to impact the results of the election. And Governor DeSantis helped make sure we became that shining example by pushing out the incompetent election supervisors in Broward and Palm Beach counties. If they were still in place, I have a really hard time believing that things would have gone as smoothly as they did. So as the Republican Party appears to be ramping up an effort to push for state-level legislation around the country focused on election integrity, what better place for CPAC to hold its convention than in a state committed to election integrity, with the Republican governor who took steps to ensure election integrity and a Republican-controlled legislature who worked with him. And to make things even more positive for the state going forward, and for the possibility of CPAC being held here every year, that Republican governor is considered among the leading candidates for the nomination for president if Donald Trump doesn't choose to run. And the fact that Governor DeSantis is also considered a strong supporter of Donald Trump and of the ascendance of populism in the Republican Party makes such a move even more logical. And finally, one of the things that Republicans can point to in future elections is the comparative success of states under Republican control in dealing with COVID, with limited or more short-term lockdowns, or in some instances no lockdowns at all, and generally doing as well or better in controlling COVID than blue states. Holding your annual conference in a state that can point to that success is just smart politics. And we at Political Spirits will keep holding our conference, so to speak, every week. I'll be releasing another episode next week, as always. Please be sure to listen and tell your friends to do so as well, and like the podcast on Facebook at Political Spirits, and follow me and the podcast on Twitter at Franklin Rye. And remember, all episodes are now on YouTube as well, and the YouTube channel is named Political Spirits Network. If you're watching on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe and hit the notification bell, and select all after you hit the bell. This is Franklin Rye. Thank you for listening.